Welcome back to the CTO Playbook, the podcast dedicated to helping CTOs excel. What if the biggest lever you had to retain your engineering team wasn't compensation, but your core technology? In today's episode, I'm joined by author and veteran technologist Lou Franco, who reveals why most teams are already swimming in tech debt. They just don't have a clear way out. We explore how invisible friction slows delivery, the surprising ROI of paying down the right kind of debt, and how to build a culture that tackles debt before it becomes a blocker. I'm your host, Adam Horner, coach to CTOs from startups to enterprises, helping you lead with clarity, confidence, and strategic impact. If you've ever felt like you're figuring it out the hard way, you're not alone. That's why I created the CTO Playbook, a podcast and platform built for tech leaders just like you. Explore coaching, cohorts, and more at thectoplaybook.com. Your path, your pace, your playbook. Let's get into it. Lou, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Good to see you again. And I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, it should be fun. So it'd be really good actually to give the listeners a little bit of a background on who you are and where you come from. So you just tell us, Lou, a little bit about what your specialty is.
Sure. So I am a software engineer, software engineering manager, and CTO at various startups. The beginning of my career was working at being a founding engineer or an early engineer at 3 different startups that all had a successful exit. And then the last job I had was working as a principal engineer at Trello when it was acquired by Atlassian. And now what I do is I'm an advisor to software teams.
Excellent. Yeah, so Trello was quite a big acquisition when it went through, wasn't it?
Yep. Mm-hmm, yes. Yeah.
What was that experience like for you?
Well, I joined the company just as it spun out of Fog Creek. And so it was less than 20 people. And I was there when it grew from about 6 million users, maybe into a lot more than that. And then we were acquired when we had about maybe 100 or a couple hundred total employees. So, and then of course you're getting into Atlassian, a big public company, much, much bigger than we are, one of 18 products at the time. So it was a really interesting experience. I got to see Trello at a very small size and then as it got quite large.
All the way through to the big stuff. Yeah. And did you find, because Atlassian obviously is an Australian company, did you find that there was much of a culture difference there, or was that something that just seemed to fit very naturally?
I actually think of all the countries that could have been different than the US, Australia is a good match for US. We have a very similar style, let's say. Yeah. And so them being far was the biggest problem, but there was a major Atlassian offices in San Francisco and in Mountain View and in Austin, Texas. And our headquarters are in New York. So, and we were a very remote company to begin with, 70% remote, Trello was. And then Atlassian actually adapted to our style. Even before the pandemic. And then, of course, it went more after that. They have a team anywhere philosophy that is modeled on Trello's philosophy. So
that's fantastic. Cool. Okay, that's a really genuine mixing and matching of the cultures as it joined then. It's great. Always love to hear about what happens after the acquisition, because I think it's one of those areas where a lot of startup founders dream about the big acquisition and don't always think about what comes afterwards. And it can sometimes be quite a jarring change or transition after the acquisition. So I'm really glad to hear that you had a wonderful experience there.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Let's wind the clock back a bit then and sort of get a bit into where you've come from, because of course you just brought this book out, Swimming in Tech Debt. But what I'd love to do is go back a little bit in time to earlier in your career when you sort of first encountered tech debt and particularly some of the challenges with it. So can you sort of take us back to the moment when you first realized, oh, tech debt, this is a problem. This is a serious issue. Yeah.
So in my first job, I was hired as a junior engineer into a company that was a financial in fintech. It was we made foreign exchange options pricing software. Right, and that was written for DOS. So this is 1992. And it was, to call it desktop application, but essentially a terminal application, like a ASCII. And during my tenure there, Windows, became more popular. We had to make a Windows port. And that was totally okay. Like our architecture wasn't that bad for that. But then when the web came out a few years later, our architecture didn't match at all. So I saw this thing of tech debt being kind of inevitable. something that's inevitable because the world just changes.
Yeah.
So that was one of my first early formative experiences. But where I really, I think, learned the lessons that drive the book is in my third job. So this is my third startup. I was the head of development, and we were acquired by a public company. In this case, it was called Kofax. And our company was maybe like less than 20 people. And
Right.
we were given a 2.5-year earn-out project. So being able to do what they requested, which would be essentially doubling our market addressability, would result in nice bonuses for everybody who came across the acquisition.
Right.
And of
So
course, if we didn't do
it,
it, right. And of course, we didn't do it, I mean, honestly, it would be bad for me. So I was very heads down on the roadmap of that project and kind of, let's just say, ignoring tech debt issues,
Right.
at least wanting to put them off. And then I got to see what happened, and my eyes were open during an exit interview. So someone was leaving the company. One of the engineers that had been in the original company was now leaving, because they wanted to move across the country. It was not only related to problems at our company, but he really let me have it with the tech debt issues that I hadn't been paying attention to. And so I took
so he
that
pretty
to
much gave you
heart.
both barrels then and gave you a real piece of his mind about it.
Oh, yeah. And so I decided to start having some one-on-ones with the rest of the engineers and heard kind of the same thing. And so we started to try to find some entry-level projects that we could start hitting the biggest pain points. And this is where I kind of realized something, where we were able to find projects, I'm going to say, that had kind of a negative cost because they delivered productivity almost immediately.
Okay.
And that experience has really driven how I think about tech debt and how to get started really thinking about tech debt if this is something that's a problem for you. That if you can find developer productivity in small projects, you can essentially get this done for free or at least low enough cost where it won't affect your roadmap. In our case, it actually helped us speed up our delivery. So it paid off right away.
Okay, so when you say paying off, you mean in terms of the amount of extra time you spend on it, you regain that time later
Yes.
on? Is that what you, yeah?
No, like almost immediately. So in this case, the project that we found was to do with the build system and the installer system, which affected all of our products. So every one of our products, I should say, this application, what we made was developer SDK, so they needed to be installed onto computers. It wasn't a web-based thing. And it was built in .NET, so they had a build process. And it was quite complicated. There were several products, and they had a quite complicated install and quite complicated build process. And almost everything you did kind of could affect that. And we were using an antiquated system. It was a couple of years old. It was the older Microsoft way of doing things. And they had much better ways of doing it. We just hadn't adopted it. So we did a small project to adopt these new systems. I don't remember how long it took, but it's on the order of a month or something like that.
Right. So not a big amount of time overall.
Not a huge amount of time. And now every time we had to update those installers and builds, there was just entire classes of bugs that could not happen in the new system. And also, the new system could be unit tested, which was a huge boon. So now there was a much less chance of a regression. So we were getting that benefit almost immediately in almost everything that we did. So my thinking about tech debt is to start thinking about those kinds of projects that give us some confidence that we can do this without impacting the roadmap. In fact, I think it can do the opposite. It could actually speed it up.
Wow. So that's quite incredible. So it started off from a disgruntled employee basically complaining about developer productivity as he was about to move across the country.
Yeah.
But the key thing was you then went and validated that. So you spoke to other engineers in the team who basically said, no, that's right. We can, it could be nicer. It could be better.
Right.
And that was the trigger, if you like, to go and basically say, okay, let's start a small, I guess you wanted to do a small project to start off with.
Just to see. And the biggest pain point, again, we still had the deadline was real. Like there was an exact date by contract. It could not be extended. So we needed to be careful. Most teams could probably have some more leeway than that.
Got it. Interesting. Okay. And so that was the first time you really saw the massive benefit of tackling tech debt then?
Well, yeah, and specifically this style of doing it. So
right.
I had been at places where we just had to do things. Like things were just so off, the architecture was just not scaling, or there's just nothing you could do about it. It was too late.
Yeah, you just hit a brick wall. You got no other option.
You had to do something about it. At an earlier job, I was actually hired specifically to help pay down a huge tech debt in this system, almost a complete rewrite that took over 2 years to do. But those are almost easier. Right, you already know it's a problem, and you have to solve it, and you're going to solve it with a rewrite or something big.
And you often have the mandate to do it, so therefore the cost is less of an issue at that stage.
Exactly, and what I'm talking about more is like what you should do in the everyday. Right. Like I was starting to see that more, that there should be a process that you're running almost all the time to keep it under control.
Cool. Okay, so that's an interesting perspective. Can you give us a bit of an idea about some of the times when you saw tech debt go utterly sideways? I mean, you mentioned those times when it gets to basically hitting a wall and, hey, look, we just got to deal with it because there's no other way. But there must be other times, I mean, I've certainly seen it, where tech debt ends up being effectively this complete sea anchor, completely slowing you down. And you just basically drag along this thing as though it's some mandatory weight you've got to pull with you.
Oh, yeah. So like I said, in my first job, that's one example. When the web came out, the almost the entire code base could be considered tech debt. It was written in C and C++. It was targeted towards Windows at this time, so used MFC and other Windows SDK type elements. It was single threaded. It was single user. So really hard to make work on the web.
Paradigm shift.
Yeah, so I left a little bit after that, but that company completely rewrote the software in order to be web-based. We had started it when I was there, but it was a huge project. And again, so that what's interesting about that example, and I do keep coming back to it in the book. It's an example of where tech debt is often described as a shortcut or something that people might have done intentionally to get some quick benefit or short-term benefit. But that in that case, that's not what happened there. Decisions were made correctly all along the way. The world just changed. Yeah. And if you're anywhere for any length of time, that's likely to happen. And we're actually, we're obviously seeing it now with AI. And so things just change, and you couldn't anticipate them. And you probably shouldn't have tried to anticipate them because you might have wasted time if you were wrong. So.
Yeah. And I see that quite often, actually, when people sort of try and think, I'm going to make sure we keep our tech stack right up to date. And there's a lot of time burnt sort of continually trying to upgrade frameworks and actually how much of their time is delivering value, delivering features. Right. It's not always quite where you'd want it to be, actually. So there is a trap on the other side of that as well.
Absolutely. You could definitely do too much. And, I've had that kind of thing happen too. And, where you just, you think there's some new technology that seems to be exactly right for what you're doing, and you jump on it too early, maybe, and it's maybe not ready for production, and then
or a little too thoroughly. Because I've also seen where people, instead of just doing, I don't know, we'll do a proof of concept or we'll do a beta test of it. Instead, they sort of jump 2 feet in and go, right, let's rewrite the entire platform in this technology before they realize, hang on, we've kind of gone down a dead end here, a bit of a technological dead end.
Right. Or it might have been a flash in the pan, or who knows? But
yeah. So one of the other things you mentioned is about actually, what are the things that we do in order to tackle tech debt in a good way within the team? Because it's all very well, as the leader saying, do this, go and do that. This is a decision, but actually getting the team to do things. Talk to us a little bit about your experiences with working with teams to try and set the groundwork for tackling tech debt well. Yeah,
so I think there are two foundational practices that I recommend, and this is something. One is very common, and one we did at Atlassian, which I very much agreed with, and try to explain to other people. So the first one is just having a really thorough style guide or values document, engineering values document that explains what it is that your team accepts as correct engineering. And along with that, a target architecture, something that explains, even if you don't have it all there today, what you're driving towards. So like this like kind of North Star architecture. So just have that written down. What that does is let the team resolve their arguments one time, put it documented, make those decisions, and then not have constant conversations inside of code reviews or in other meetings. Like they can point to that document. If they want to change it, they can change it, but that's done in a collaborative way, not at spot times in a Slack when discussing something or in a PR comment. And that, that covers, most people will cover things like simple things like that lint rules could do. But I think you should go beyond that to, more even getting to the target architectures. That's one. I think a lot of people do something like that, but I'd say keep going, like describe more things about your engineering values.
Yeah, because I think that's something a lot of teams skip over, isn't it? Actually setting things into documents and saying, there you go, there's the canonical version of our linting rules, of our coding style, of our target architecture, of our technology choices, etc.
Right.
So,
and that's a good point on linting rules. A lot of these things can be automated. And of course, if you can do that, and there are third-party tools and, who can do security type audits, or if those are useful to you, I definitely would use them. You don't want people to have to always refer to the document if a tool can just do it for you, right?
Right.
So, and then the second thing, which we did at Atlassian, is our engineering manager and PM pre-negotiated a split in the budget between PM-led time and engineering-led time. And what that meant was, and then the engineering-led time was driven autonomously by the engineering team.
Okay.
So the PM controlled the backlog of the PM-led time, and so they wrote the specifications, and our designer did the designs, and they wrote the benefit statement, all the things that would have to go with those projects, normal feature projects and bugs, and then the engineering-led time, which is admittedly smaller, but we were able to autonomously put it towards whatever we thought was best, which included tech debt, but also other things.
Okay.
Things where the engineers ourselves were the customer, so dev tooling type things, or tech debt, and where the main benefit hypothesis would be developer productivity. So that's what that allotment was for. And so once you do those two things, what comes next is how you run that engineering-led time.
Yeah, but just give us an idea. Did you have like a guide split between those two? Because I've heard all sorts of numbers come out of different teams in terms of, you should have, a minimal amount of engineering-led time versus a product drives everything, which I often admittedly mostly hear from CEOs of smaller startups rather than people who have actually driven big projects. But so do you have a guidance on where that split goes?
Sure. So it has to do with where you are in the software lifecycle of your product, right? So if you're a true startup and you don't have product market fit, and a couple of engineers, I don't think you put a lot of time towards there. I never would say it should be zero. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
I never would say there's always going to be something, because it's not just tech debt, but you're not worried as much about tech debt, and you don't have enough of an infrastructure yet to really be. Hopefully, it's not aging that quickly. So at that end of the life cycle, so one thing people are maybe familiar with is Jeffrey Moore's work, so like Crossing the Chasm and some of his other work. So if you can look at his diagrams of a software life cycle, it's like it starts off low, and then there's a hump, and then there's a decline. When you're in the growth phase, right, you're going to be finding that your architectures are not scaling, right, and you're going to be needing to do some work, this engineering-led work, towards updating them. It would be good to get ahead of that, right? So you should be monitoring your usage and comparing that to your stress tests and so forth, and getting ahead of that. So it would be bigger, right, for that. There's going to be some time when maybe a product is a cash cow, but it doesn't change much. Like we're not adding features, we're not fixing bugs. It's important, and mostly what we want to do is maintain what we have.
The stable phase, right?
Right, a stable phase. And there, again, it depends on exactly what's going on, but your main goal here is reducing costs. So you might be finding that the best way to do that is through tech debt payments, like being able to replace systems with more off-the-shelf components, or you might find ways to outsource parts of it, and you want to make it very easy for a third party to update it. So it kind of depends on what exactly you're doing in this phase. I could see arguments for both, but that's what I'd be thinking about.
So generally cost reductions and simplification during that sort of stable phase of the life cycle.
And then during the decline, you're obviously looking for cost reductions because like you're doing everything to, and what you more are looking for is like migrations to the new thing, right? So like, and that might be a very engineering led thing. Like, how do I get, now that this thing is declining, I might be now building up a new thing that supersedes the old thing. I'm still in this market, just with a totally different take on it. You see a lot of people did this during the time when they went from like server installed software to cloud-based software. Like they might have had to do a migration phase.
Yeah.
So again, those things would be more engineering-led type projects like data migration and so forth. So again, I would not to give numbers on the split, but more think about where you are in the life cycle and what kinds of projects you're doing and what it takes at each of those.
Okay, that's pretty good guidance, I think.
Yeah.
I've normally ended up with sort of saying, roughly, because I've often been working most commonly in that early growth phase, just after the product market fit. So it is worth at that point looking at your tech debt, but not growing so fast that you're preparing for hyperscale. I've done that too, but not as commonly. And generally in that phase, I've normally thought about it as being about 25%, but it is one of those sort of very much finger in the air numbers, which can differ from industry to industry, from use case to use case, can't it?
Yeah, and it needs to be revisited, on some regular schedule. I would say pick something, even if it's too low, that's fine. just as long as you, look at it, see if
and use that as a benchmark, so you can
use it as a benchmark. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you will have to change it every year. Like you'll have to think about it. Like, especially if you're changing where you are in that life cycle. And then for any CTO who's like managing like several products, it's going to be different for each one. It might be different for different teams on each one. So I go over this in the book where I sort of like give a little mini spreadsheet example of like you might have an overall allocation. Like maybe you think, okay, for the whole company, I want to max it at 20-25%, but then the individual allocations are going to be different based on where those products are.
Yeah, especially if you've got multi-different life cycle point products. Yeah,
yes.
That makes a lot of sense. Cool. So we want to give the engineers some autonomy then to be able to decide when and how much tech debt they get, time to actually work on to pay down. Do you just give them a free-for-all within that?
I'm going to say, of course, no. I mean, autonomy, I'm not saying it's not autonomy. It is autonomy, but it has accountability, right? Along with it. And so what I would ask back from the engineers is that they run some kind of process so that, what I suggest is that they actually think about how PMs manage their backlog and come up with a way of managing their backlog in a similar way. Okay. So PMs have there's a framework, there's a lot of frameworks, but there's one that a lot of people know called RICE that is a way of scoring their backlog. In the book, I propose a framework. It's not the only way to do it. It's a way, but I propose this as an objective scoring mechanism to use on your tech debt. And then I would say that if a team is running some kind of reasonable process and also can provide back to management and also upper management proof that it's having some good effect. So proof that it's burning down whatever problem they're having in their system or delivering developer productivity, then that something where the CTO can then see the business benefit, right? Because like that's ultimately why we're doing this, right? So what features did it help deliver? What productivity benefits did we get? Sometimes that's easy to do, and if you can, that's great. Like for example, if you had used, I'll just give an example that I see often: people who had been on Angular and now they're moving to React. Well, they have 200 pages of Angular and 0 pages of React at the beginning, and then they show a graph of that moving over time. That might be a way to explain it. Yeah. Same thing can happen with programming languages. At Trello, we built our app in Objective-C, and we were solely building all new features in Swift and converting old features so we could show something like that. And they did the same thing on the web team with CoffeeScript to TypeScript. Those kinds of things are easy to show, like that you are making progress against some of these big problems.
Yeah. Gosh, I remember coding in CoffeeScript. I'm glad that didn't last too long.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So and that sort of observability, that sort of measurability of the actual work, that seems to be quite numeric and not necessarily financial. So in terms of the financial side of it, that's something where you're sort of thinking that has already been worked out In other words, the benefits of moving to, say, for example, TypeScript from CoffeeScript, let's take that as a lovely example to get away from, that's already been decided. So therefore, the value there is just simply in getting it done. But are there other cases where you are a little bit more, I don't know, literal with the actual finances involved?
Yeah. So one of the things I talk about in the book is this concept of visibility of the tech debt versus the invisibility. So I'm mostly talking about tech debt that doesn't have much of a visible effect, or the visible effect is incidental to what you're doing. But there are things that where the visible effect is incidental, like your tech debt might be causing security issues, or your tech debt, like you say, might be causing performance issues, and you can't just fix them because of an architecture choice or because of a technology choice. You're not able to just quickly address the performance problem or quickly address the security problem. So fixing the tech debt as a side effect also delivers this other thing that is very visible and tied to business results. The more you can do, generally what I want you to do is to look out for those, because those are very appreciated and understood and will get support from the rest of the business and the customers. Yeah. But essentially what you're still doing is it's mostly like an internal code thing and maybe an architecture thing or a programming language switch, or it's a very internally focused thing that you're doing that doesn't really need the PM to be involved, because it's a technical change. Like you're changing code that already works to other code that already does the same thing, but in a better way. It doesn't need a specification. Just do the same thing it does, right? But it incidentally delivers these like business effects. Like those kinds of projects are, if you can find them in this tech debt process, that's great. Now, if that's all they only are the visible effects, and it's not because of architecture, then I think those are really PM-led projects that they should be running and using to deliver business effects.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so really you're talking about, I don't know, if you think about the iceberg model, it's the stuff that's under the waterline.
Yeah. The metaphor that I'm trying to draw with the swimming in tech debt is that you're swimming and surrounded by water and going upstream. And to the outside world, it just looks like you're a slow swimmer, but you can feel the effect as the swimmer. But the rest of your company and your customers just think you're slow.
Yeah, they're just standing on the shore pointing at you, not moving very fast compared to them.
Right.
That's a really good analogy. I like that. It's very visual, very quick to see it. And so you mentioned there a number of different ways of measuring it. What about some of the sort of, I guess, more traditional things? We've got obviously the DORA metrics and we've got things like OKRs. Are those ways of measuring that you bring into the approach that you take? Yeah.
So what I like about DORA, and just to quickly, for people who might not be familiar with it, it's four metrics, and they're mostly about DevOps, but they're very tied to business results. So I hope I get them here off the top of my head, but the amount of deployments or the rate of deployments that fail, so need a hot fix, that's one of the metrics. Another one is the mean time to actually fix those problems if you have a failed deployment, how long does it take to fix?
The mean time
how
to
long
recovery.
It takes a line of code to go from being committed to being in production, and the deployment frequency. So how fast you're deploying, and all of those things result in business results. I think generally that people would be happy with if your metrics were good there, but they're all lagging indicators. So there's not a good way to affect them. Like in your daily, I can't go right now to my desk and increase deployment frequency like from my desk, right? It's like, or make my deployment failure rate go down, right? It's something that happens because of good practices all along. So one of the things that's been developed after DORA by some of the same people is this other metric system called DevX, DEVEX. And in that one, they try to identify the drivers of productivity. So things that you're doing like in the moment that are resulting in low productivity or high productivity. So they identify, extending flow. So being in the zone and having many hours to do deep work.
And specifically few distractions as well.
Correct. Yeah. And then the second one would be shortening feedback loops. So these could be code review loops, could be design question loops or questions to PMs, or even among engineers themselves, like doing an RFC or so forth. And then the third one is cognitive load. And that more gets at like the code itself being hard to remember, there being a lot of gotchas in the code. And so what I look to do or what I would advise people do when they're programming is if they can do things that hit those indicators, and these are more leading indicators, so that they should try to do them. If paying off some small amount of tech debt is going to get you a faster code review, that's going to pay for itself immediately, because you're going to do maybe an hour more work on the end of a PR, and maybe speed up the code review by a day in calendar time, right? Like, so the code review might take half as much time, but the person doing it will more likely pick up that code review because they know the code is clean.
Got it. Cool. Okay. And in terms of, once we've got our teams to actually deploy some of these changes that we've got them working on a few parts of the tech debt that they've got some autonomy and they're going over it. We get it done. We get it out there.
All right.
And then they sort of start talking to some of the others. And that's a bit at point which you can end up with sort of either a little bit of chaos because people are sort of going, oh, we're doing it really well. And others are going, oh, we're doing it really badly. Do you have an approach there where you can sort of help, I don't know, institutionalize the improvements in behavior and approach to the way that works then, Lou?
Yeah. So one of the things I talk about in the book is how tech debt is not something that I would advise engineers to talk much about outside of engineering, like with their non-engineering peers, because it is hard to explain and hard to value. And like I said, it's the water you swim in, but they can't see it. But inside of engineering, it's really important to talk about it.
Yeah.
And as a CTO, I advise people look for these wins. Look for these times where people are doing it the way you are trying to espouse inside your company, and look for ways to recognize that. So there are times there's normal times when this is happening. You might be recognizing an anniversary, or someone might be getting a bigger promotion, or you might just want to talk about a team's delivery, what a team had delivered, but inside of engineering.
Yeah.
And you're going to want to show, like, if the engineers have been providing you with dashboards of their work, you're going to want to show this to the rest of the teams. And if you do that, they're going to start to see that you value that. So it's not enough that you talk about it, but if you're giving recognition to teams that are doing it the way you think it should be done, it's going to model it for the rest of your teams.
So it's the proactive signaling of the wins that you've had, and the fact, not just the wins, but also the fact that you as a leader value the wins that they've had. And often I find as well, the way in which they've gone about it. Because sometimes you can tackle tech debt and you can do it in a sort of a disgruntled, unhappy way. And other times when you can tackle it and actually it comes out to be something it's actually a relief for those people involved. And sort of it feels like it's more proactive. And I find that those projects, small projects where people go, okay, I really want to do this because it's going to make my life better. It's going to make my day-to-day more fun, are much better than people who kind of end up at the end of the line thinking, okay, I've got to do it now. There's no way I can possibly avoid this any further. Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
And in terms of actual rewards, promotions, do you advise that as well?
Well, again, you have to balance. You're going to have whatever your promotion criteria are.
Right.
I guess what I would say is, if tech debt is a problem at your company where you know that solving it offers real business results, then of course the people who solve it are like, if that's also part of their promotion criteria, that it should be considered. There is a danger, right, where, and you hear this a lot at big tech companies, often people inside of them often talk about people just rewriting things so that they can have a good thing to put in their promotion packet. So like, if you don't want to encourage that.
The so-called CV-driven development.
Yeah. So it's definitely real and could be a problem. So you don't want to do that. That's why you want a little bit of these controls. Like, you want to express your constraints, stay within this budget, use a process that identifies the high value things and then puts the appropriate amount of resource towards it. But if it gets through all that and they've given you the observability back to it, if it does all those things and if that's what you wanted, of course, like I think that those people should be recognized. And so should the people delivering feature development that also meets that criteria. I of course, don't think you should only recognize those.
Yeah, the only time I'd say there's an exception to that is when your entire organization is dealing with tech debt. And I was brought into an organization a few years back where I think, like, very much like what you just said, that you were brought in specifically to tackle a great big pile of tech debt, and it took a couple of years to clear it out and obviously change the team in the process. I had one of those experiences as well, where I came into an organization and they were basically pretty much stuck. They'd sort of run themselves up one of those little dead ends technologically and sort of had to back their way out and rebuild a platform. But all the while trying to keep, the actual revenue going. So we didn't end up losing that on the way. And so it wasn't just a simple case of, okay, let's rebuild it and just drop it in. It had to be an evolution.
Oh yeah. Ours was run in parallel. Once it got going a little bit, so maybe after the first year, they was run in parallel for quite a long time. Yeah.
Right. Well, the one I did, we basically reinvented it from the inside out. So we just basically dismantled the old bit. It was a classic strangler fig, this fig that grows up the outside of another tree and then gradually takes over. So the tree on the inside sort of rots and crumbles away, and you're left with the vine that sort of wrapped itself around it. So in our case, those sort of vine stems were the microservices that we brought in place to replace the monolith that had been running there. But yeah, so that we had something closer to that. And I guess for the first 7 months, it was literally like if we weren't working on tech debt, there wasn't anything else to work on. We just literally had to clear out some of the cruft to actually get things moving. Right. But that's the only scenario I can think of where that's actually the case. I think in almost all other scenarios, it's sort of an incremental approach and a measured approach. You don't want to be overboard on it.
Right. In the book, I talk about there's all kinds of tech debt where there's going to be things about it that make it very dangerous to deal with. And so one thing is this chance of regressions. So it's a piece of code that is highly dependent upon by all of your customers for some vital part of their work. In the case I was talking about, it's a 24/7 market system for energy. Like this is zero. Like we already had high SLA requirements. There's nothing that we could. So there's this chance of regressions. There's how big it is, how difficult the new architecture might be to understand. Maybe you don't even have experience with it.
Yeah.
And then there's this kind of other thing, which is like the uncertainty that what you're going to do is even going to work. Right? Like you might not be totally right. So in all of those cases, I advocate a very measured approach, so if you don't know that it's going to work, you're going to want to do like spikes, pilots, something to prove to yourself that these things are going to work before you do anything. If you're going to have a huge chance of regressions, you're definitely going to want to have a very, like 2 systems running, fallback, something, a very test migrations for data migrations where you're testing it all the time. One of the things that Apple did when they released their new file system is before the file system was announced, unbeknownst to all of us users, our phones were being converted to the new file system as a trial to see if it would work, in place and then abandoned, but just to make sure it would work. And so they had, by the time they released it, they had already tested, I don't even know how many millions of times on real devices. So, and sussed out all the problems in it. That's the kind of thing you have to do when you're going to change a system that might have high regression. So in my scoring framework, if it's scoring all these elements very high, indicating, don't pay this or be very careful. I offer strategies that are like more measured than just like rewrite it.
Yeah. And I think with that classic case I've seen is with the auth system. Whenever people want to change the auth system, it's one of those things that's super high risk because if you can't log in, nothing else matters. It's right. You're dead in the water.
Right.
Cool. So we've pretty much gone full circle there, haven't we? So maybe it's a good point for me to try and distill what we've just said down into sort of a few key points. So I guess the first one that you mentioned there was assessing what you've got. How much tech debt is there? What does it look like? And what is the life cycle you're actually working with? Are you in a startup pre-product market fit? Are you in hypergrowth? Are you in steady state? Or are you in a declining platform? And assess whether you should be going, how much tech debt you should be tackling in each of those cases.
Yes.
Number 2, you talked about constraints. There is a budget, there is a value to derive, there is some sort of measurement, whether they're OKRs or other kind of loops on there to have a look at and make sure you stay within those, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Number 2. So then you also mentioned about giving autonomy. So letting the engineers have an element of decision-making power over the time that they have. And again, we talked about the proportion of that, somewhere around about 20-25%, depending on which part of that cycle we're at.
Yeah. And what I would say also is when you're giving them autonomy, make sure you explain, like the software lifecycle concept and the idea that they would have some kind of process that is based on the business value that they're delivering. Essentially, that's developer productivity, but then anything else that they see along there that they would have to run a process that takes that into account.
Yeah, so it's a clear goal that they're aiming for. It's not just a case of go and make all the shiny that you want.
Yeah.
I've seen that go wrong as well.
A little bit of that is okay. There's a developer experience element to it.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Keeping people happy, learning new things. I've rarely seen an engineer who doesn't like to learn new stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. And then so within that, you also mentioned about increasing the review loop speed, shortening feedback time as ways, for example, to change without necessarily changing the code, but changing the processes around that as well.
Right.
You also then mentioned about a level of holding people to account. So showing some sort of numbers or stats that show progress towards the goal on this. So you mentioned things like burn down charts, actual versus budget, productivity measures, and any kind of observable effects that you had on there.
Right. And those, especially those side effect, visible effects, are also that's where that might come in. So like you're doing this thing that's mostly about code change, but you're delivering security improvements or network connectivity improvements, whatever it might be that's coming out of the fact that you're removing antiquated code and replacing it with something.
Got it. Excellent. And then I think that sort of brings us full loop. So at the end, how do we basically take what we've learned, what we've done, and then push that back in? So you mentioned about sort of sharing some of those stories, looking for recognition or even promotions if necessary for some of the people who've been involved in that. So you reward the kind of behavior overall that you want. And then I guess from there, then we just go back around again. We go back to assessment and start again, right?
Right, exactly. So one of the things I talk about is that there's kind of surveys might be involved in the assessment phase and in the final phase. So like you'd want to compare like a survey, developer satisfaction surveys, job satisfaction. How do they feel about the work that they're delivering? Doing those in the assessment phase, and then again at the end as you loop around, right? Like to show that you're having some improvement, some effect on developer satisfaction.
Absolutely.
Which I think is another big deliverable of dealing with tech debt.
Yeah, I know. One of the things I found is that talking to the board or to the execs about tech debt is normally it's a quick way to get a closed ear. On the other hand, if you can show those benefits as a result of it, then actually you get a conversation that is valid and relevant, but also a little bit of understanding about, okay, so where does some of the engineering time go? Yeah, I love that image of standing on the shore and watching somebody swimming upstream.
Right.
Talking of that, Lou, how can people get hold of the book? What's the book called and where's the best way for them to find it?
It's called Swimming in Tech Debt.
Right.
And it's on Amazon, so you can search for it there in the Amazon store. If you go to loufranco.com/techdebtbook, I'll have a link to it there. You can also sign up to my email list where I offer some extra content related to the book.
That's fantastic. We'll put a link into the show notes as well. And can people find you on LinkedIn or one of the social networks? Which is your favorite place for people to get hold of you?
Yeah, LinkedIn would be the best. I'm Lou Franco on LinkedIn. So /in/Lou Franco. And please, mention that you saw me on this podcast and I'd be happy to connect to you.
Absolutely fantastic, Lou. It's been wonderful speaking to you. Thank you very much for your time today. And for those people who want to find the book, as I said, we'll have the link in the show notes. And Lou, thank you.
Thank you, Adam. It's been great.
Thank you for listening to the whole episode. I appreciate your time. So just before you go, I'd like to ask you for a favor in return for putting together this episode of the CTO Playbook for you. Please share the episode with just one person who will appreciate it. Wherever you're listening, whether that is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or another platform, sharing the episode will help more CTOs find the podcast and enable me to create more great content. Remember that you can find more information on the CTOplaybook.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the CTO Playbook.